"You paid me, let's do it tonight," she said. Rancher saw something horrific. The rancher had always been a solitary man. For years he worked his land, waking before sunrise and often working late into the evening, taking only short breaks for meals. His life was a pattern of repetitive tasks, fixing fences, tending to cattle, cleaning barns, and mending anything that broke. His only company was the sound of the wind and the occasional bird that would fly over the open fields. He was used to it. The isolation had become part of him. He didn't mind it at first, but as the years passed, it started to weigh on him. His friends were few, and his family, well, they lived far away. One warm spring afternoon, after finishing a long day of chores, he decided to ride into town. The local town was small, just a few streets lined with shops and a single dusty road that led out to the ranches. It was a place where people knew everyone, and news traveled quickly. He hadn't visited in a while, so it was a good excuse to stretch his legs and gather supplies. His horse's hooves clopped steadily on the dry dirt road as he made his way to the small town. The wind was calm, and the air smelled of fresh grass and earth. As he neared the town, the familiar sight of the general store and the old inn came into view. There weren't many people on the streets, just a few families walking down the road and the occasional farmer going about their business. It was peaceful, just how he liked it. He tied his horse to the post outside the general store and made his way inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. The store was small, filled with the smell of wood and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, filled with all sorts of items: canned goods, sacks of flour, dried herbs, and handmade tools. The rancher didn't need much, just a few bags of feed and some basic supplies. But it was always nice to have a reason to step into the town and see some faces. As he made his way to the counter, he noticed a woman standing by the window, staring out onto the street. She looked out of place. He didn't recognize her, but there was something about her that made him look twice. She was standing still, her eyes lost in thought, her long dark hair blowing gently in the breeze from the open window. She wore a simple dress, but it was worn, and her shoes were dusty, as if she had been walking for miles. She turned for a moment and caught his gaze, offering a small, unsure smile. He wasn't one to strike up conversations with strangers, but there was something different about her. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, the way her eyes seemed to hold a story that hadn't been told yet. The rancher felt an unexpected tug of curiosity, something that didn't happen often. He went up to the counter but kept his eyes on her as he paid for his goods. "Beautiful day out there," he said, attempting to break the silence, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to. The woman didn't respond at first, and for a moment he thought she hadn't heard him. But then she slowly turned and met his gaze. Her eyes were tired, but there was a certain strength in them. "Yes," she replied, softly, almost too quietly. "But it's been a long journey." The rancher nodded, still unsure how to respond. He wasn't the type to pry into other people's lives, but the way she spoke caught his attention. He could see she was troubled. The rancher wasn't a man who asked questions, especially about personal matters, but something about her seemed different. Her presence made him feel like there was more to this encounter than just a passing glance. She shifted her weight, glanced down at the floor, and then back up at him. "I could use a ride to the next town over," she said. "If you're headed that way, I'd be grateful." The rancher hesitated. He wasn't used to offering rides to strangers, especially not with the cattle work still waiting for him back at the ranch. But there was something in her voice, something in the way she spoke, that made him reconsider. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, pleading and uncertain, as if she didn't have anyone else to turn to.
He took a moment, studying her face.
She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Her clothes were worn, and her hands were rough, like she had been working hard for a long time. but there was something gentle about her presence, something that made him want to help.
"I'm headed out that way," he said finally, his voice gruff but kind.
"I can give you a lift." The woman's face softened, and for the first time, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was warm, like she had just been given a lifeline.
"Bruss, thank you," she said. And there was relief in her voice. They walked out of the store together, the woman trailing slightly behind him. He opened the door for her, and she stepped out onto the dusty street, the sun beginning to set behind the distant hills. The rancher's horse was waiting for them, tied to the post outside. "I'm Jack," the rancher said as he approached the horse, holding out his hand. The woman took his hand with a firm grip, surprising him with her strength. "Mary?" she said, her voice still quiet but steady. "I appreciate this, Jack. Breath. Really." He nodded, not knowing what else to say. Psst. He hadn't shared much about himself, and he wasn't sure if he should. He didn't expect to have a long conversation with her. It was just a ride, a small act of kindness. They would travel together for a few hours and then part ways. Simple. They set off down the road, the rancher guiding his horse with ease, as the woman walked beside him. The sun was low now, casting a golden light across the rolling hills. They didn't speak much at first, the silence between them comfortable in its own way. Grasp. There was something peaceful about the quiet, the only sound being the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the occasional chirp of birds in the trees. As they continued along the road, the woman seemed lost in her thoughts. Jack didn't press her, knowing she would talk if she wanted to. It wasn't long before they reached a small creek, and he pulled the horse to a stop to take a short break. Desperate, he untied the reins and sat down on a large rock by the water, letting the horse drink. Mary sat on the grass nearby, her eyes looking out at the setting sun. "You've been on the road for a while, haven't you?" Jack asked after a while, unable to keep the question in. He wasn't sure why he wanted to know, but it felt right to ask. Maybe he was just trying to pass the time. Mary nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "A few days," she said. "Just trying to get away, from everything." Jack didn't push her further. He understood what it was like to want to escape, to find peace away from the chaos of the world. Perhaps. Sometimes the silence of the open land was all a person needed. They stayed there for a while, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. There was something about this moment, something quiet and serene that made Jack feel like he had done the right thing in offering her a ride. He wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but for now it felt like the right decision. As the evening went on, Jack and Mary continued their journey, riding in companionable silence. The road they traveled was long, stretching out like a ribbon of dirt between the rolling hills. The sky turned from soft orange to a deep purple, and the stars began to twinkle overhead. The quiet of the countryside was soothing, and Jack found himself at ease, even with a stranger beside him. He wasn't one to open up easily, but there was something about Mary that made him feel like it was okay. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her eyes or the way she looked at the world as if she was carrying something heavy. Whatever it was, it drew him in. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't mind the company. By the time they reached a small clearing, the sun had set and the moon was rising high in the sky. Verses. Jack pulled his horse to a stop. The quiet of the night felt different now, a little more intimate, as the sounds of the day faded away. The only thing that remained was the soft rustling of the trees and the occasional chirp of crickets in the distance. It was peaceful, but the silence also seemed to hang heavy, as if there was something unsaid between them. Mary broke the silence first. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I didn't expect to find someone like you out here," she said, looking up at the stars. Most people around here keep to themselves. Jack didn't answer right away. He was used to being alone, used to working the land with no one around to talk to. But her words made him think. I guess I'm the same way, he said finally, his voice low. I work the ranch, keep to my routine. Bray, it's a quiet life. Mary nodded, and there was a brief pause before she spoke again. I've been running for a while now, she said, her tone a little more hesitant. I've made some mistakes. Things got out of hand. I just needed to leave it all behind. Jack didn't ask what kind of mistake she meant. He knew better than to pry into someone else's past. People had their reasons for running, for seeking out new lives, and sometimes those reasons were too painful to talk about. He had his own history, his own regrets, but he didn't share those with anyone. There were some things that were better left unsaid. I get it, Jack said after a moment. Sometimes you just need to start fresh. Find a place where you can breathe. Mary looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Exactly. I don't know what I'm going to do once I get to the next town, but I'll figure it out. I always do. Jack thought about what she said. He admired her confidence, her determination. Life on the ranch hadn't always been easy, but he had always made do. The land was unforgiving, and sometimes the work seemed endless, but there was a certain comfort in it, a sense of purpose. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Maybe that's what Mary was searching for, a place where things made sense again. Well, you're welcome to stay in town for a while, Jack said, offering her a place to rest. I don't know what you're running from, but you can take a break here if you need to. The town's small, but it's a peaceful place. Mary's eyes softened. She seemed grateful for the offer, but there was something else in her expression, something Jack couldn't quite place.
Breath. Thanks, she said quietly. I might take you up on that.
It's been a long time since I've had a real rest. Jack didn't know what else to say. He wasn't much for small talk, but he could see that Mary was weary, both physically and emotionally. The weight she carried wasn't just from the journey. It was something deeper. He didn't ask her about it. Regrets. He didn't need to. Everyone had their own burdens to bear. As they sat there, the fireflies began to emerge, their tiny lights blinking on and off in the cool night air. The stars overhead shone brightly, and the soft sounds of the night filled the air. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. It was as if the world had stopped for just a little while, allowing them both to rest. Jack leaned back against a large rock, staring up at the sky. You ever think about where you'll be in a few years? He asked, his voice quiet. Mary looked at him, surprised by the question. I try not to think too far ahead. Too many things change in the blink of an eye. I just take it one day at a time. Jack nodded, understanding what she meant. Brown in desperation. Life on the ranch had taught him that nothing was certain. Things could be going well one day, and the next, everything could change. It wasn't easy, but it was the way of things. They sat in silence for a while longer, the firelight casting soft shadows across their faces. Jack felt a strange sense of connection to this woman. He didn't know her well, and he wasn't sure what her past looked like, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They were two people, sitting under the same stars, sharing a quiet evening in a world that seemed so much bigger than either of them. Eventually, Mary stood up, stretching her legs. Breath. I should probably get some sleep, she said, her voice breaking the stillness. Tomorrow's another day. Jack nodded, standing up as well. Rest. I'll stay up for a bit longer, he said. You get some rest.
We'll make it to the next town by noon if we keep going at this pace. Mary smiled, a tired but grateful expression on her face. Thanks, Jack.
I'll sleep better knowing I'm not alone out here. Jack watched her as she made her way to the edge of the clearing, where she laid down on a patch of grass, her head resting on her rolled-up coat. She seemed to settle into the quiet night, her breathing slow and steady. Jack couldn't help but feel a little protective of her, even though they were strangers. There was something about her vulnerability that stirred something in him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He stayed by the fire for a while longer, watching the flames dance and listening to the night. There was something calming about the fire, something that helped him clear his thoughts. The night stretched on, and the rancher felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. But he was strange, but he felt like he had made a difference, even if it was just in a small way. Maybe that's all anyone could hope for, to make a difference, to help someone along the way. As the fire burned down to embers, Jack finally stood up, stretched his stiff muscles, and made his way over to his horse. He tied the reins loosely, making sure the horse had enough room to graze, and then lay down beside the fire. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the night, and let himself drift off into a peaceful sleep. The world was quiet, and for now, everything seemed right. The next morning arrived quietly, the soft rays of the sun creeping over the hills and gently nudging Jack awake. The air was crisp, the kind of morning where the earth felt fresh and full of possibility. He stretched as he rose from his spot by the fire, his body stiff from sleeping on the ground. The horse was still grazing nearby, its head lowered to the grass, content in the quiet morning. Jack glanced over to where Mary had slept and saw that she was still lying there, her body curled into a ball for warmth. He didn't want to wake her too early, so he busied himself with preparing breakfast. There were some leftover bread and cheese he had packed from the night before, but he also wanted to make sure the horse had enough to eat. The morning was peaceful, a perfect way to start the day, but Jack had the nagging feeling that things were about to change. As he prepared the small campfire to cook, he couldn't help but think about Mary. He had given her a ride out of kindness, but there was something deeper at play. He had seen the weariness in her eyes the night before, heard the quiet desperation in her voice when she spoke about starting over. She wasn't just running away from something. She was looking for a place where she could rebuild, a place to feel safe again. Jack couldn't understand everything about her, but he didn't have to. Sometimes the reasons people had for their actions were complicated. Was respected that. Life had taught him that you couldn't always know the whole story. Everyone had their burdens, their hidden struggles, and sometimes people just needed someone to lend a hand without asking too many questions. As he finished cooking, he walked over to Mary, kneeling beside her and gently shaking her shoulder. "Mary, it's time to get up," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "The sun's up, and we've got a long ride ahead." She stirred, groaning softly before opening her eyes. For a moment she seemed disoriented, but then she smiled up at him, her eyes still tired but appreciative.
"Good morning," she said, her voice hoarse from sleep.
"Sorry, I must have slept through the whole night."
You needed the rest, Jack replied, offering her a hand to help her sit up. "It's a long journey." Mary took his hand and slowly sat up, stretching her arms above her head.
She glanced around at the small camp they had set up. "I haven't slept like that in ages," she said, her voice carrying a note of relief. "Thank you, Jack. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," Jack said with a small smile. "We're both just passing through. It's the least I can do." They shared a quiet moment, the sounds of the morning filling the air. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the soft whinny of the horse. Jack handed her the bread and cheese he had prepared, and they sat down on the grass together, eating in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. There was something peaceful about it. Sometimes words weren't needed. The simple act of sharing a meal made things feel more normal, more grounded. As they ate, Mary broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quiet. "Maybe I should head back to town. I can find work. Start over again." Jack looked at her, his brow furrowed slightly. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to," he said. "You can stay as long as you need to. I don't know much about what you're running from, but I do know that no one should feel like they have to go back to something that makes them unhappy." Mary's gaze dropped to the ground, her hands picking at the grass absent-mindedly. "It's not that simple," she said softly. "There are things I can't outrun, things that follow you no matter where you go. I thought maybe this place could be different, but I'm not sure I can leave everything behind." Jack didn't know how to respond. He could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the weight of what she was carrying. He knew what it was like to carry burdens, to feel like the past was always lurking in the background, threatening to catch up. He wanted to help, but there were no easy answers. But life didn't come with instructions, and sometimes you had to find your way, one step at a time. "Well, whatever you decide, just know that you're not alone," Jack said quietly. "Sometimes it takes time to figure things out. No one expects you to have all the answers right away." Mary looked up at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect kindness like this. Not from someone I don't even know." Jack nodded, unsure of what else to say. He wasn't good with words, especially when it came to comforting others. But he meant what he said. People often struggled in silence, and sometimes the best thing you could do was offer them a little peace and quiet. They finished their meal, and Jack packed up the rest of the supplies. The morning sun was getting higher, and the air was growing warmer. It was time to move on. They mounted the horse together, and with a gentle nudge, Jack set them back on the road. The journey ahead seemed a little less daunting with company, though both of them knew the path wouldn't be easy. Still, they had each other for the moment, and that was enough. As they rode through the countryside, the land around them seemed to stretch on forever, endless fields of green that gave way to hills and trees in the distance. The road was quiet, the kind of place where you could lose yourself in your thoughts. But Jack wasn't thinking about much at all. He was focused on the rhythm of the ride, the feeling of the horse moving beneath him. He glanced over at Mary, who was sitting quietly beside him, her gaze focused on the road ahead. For a while neither of them spoke. The world seemed to slow down around them, as if the earth itself was giving them a brief moment of peace. But then Mary spoke again, her voice breaking the stillness. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her tone thoughtful, "but I do know that I'm ready to find out." Jack looked at her, seeing the change in her. Breath. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived the night before. There was something different in her now, something more hopeful. Maybe she hadn't figured everything out, but she was ready to take the next step, whatever it might be. "That's all any of us can do," Jack said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Take it one step at a time." And with that they continued down the road, the sun rising higher in the sky, lighting the way ahead. There were still challenges to face, still questions to answer, but for the first time in a long time it felt like they were moving forward together, and that was enough. As the days passed, Jack and Mary continued their journey. Each day brought them closer to their destination, but it also seemed to bring a deeper understanding of one another. They had spent time talking, sharing small stories, and navigating the quiet roads together. The more time Jack spent with Mary, the more he felt like there was something about her that he couldn't quite figure out. She was strong, yet there was a vulnerability that she tried hard to hide, protect. Sometimes in the stillness of the evening, Jack could see the weight she carried, though she rarely spoke of it. Her past was a mystery, but Jack didn't press her to talk. He understood that sometimes people didn't need to share everything, especially when the truth was too painful to confront. One afternoon, as they rode through a dense patch of woods, the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting shadows on the road. The rhythmic sound of a horse's hooves was calming, and for a moment, it felt as though time had stopped entirely. Breaths. Jack was lost in his thoughts, his mind wandering back to the quiet, simple life he had known on the ranch. But when he glanced over at Mary, he saw that she was tense, her eyes darting around as if she were looking for something. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, his voice breaking the silence. "You look worried." Mary quickly shook her head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," she said. "Just a bit on edge, I guess." Jack didn't believe her. There was something in her voice, a tremor, something that told him there was more going on inside her than she was willing to admit, but instead of pressing her, Jack simply nodded. He knew that sometimes people just needed a little space to deal with their own emotions. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They'd been riding together for several days now, and this was the first time he had seen Mary act so uneasy. They continued down the road, the trees eventually giving way to open fields again. As the landscape changed, so did the air, growing warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky.
They rode for hours, only stopping to rest and eat briefly.
The journey was tiring, but they had both grown used to the road, to the rhythm of the ride. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt good to be moving forward, away from the past. By late afternoon, they came upon a small, quiet town. It was a place Jack had heard about but never visited. He had no reason to stop here, but the sight of the small houses and shops brought an unexpected sense of relief. The town was nestled between two rolling hills, with a river flowing nearby. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic. Maybe this was what Mary needed, a place to rest, a place where she could think about what came next. "We should stop here for the night," Jack suggested as they rode into town. "It's getting late and we could use some rest." Mary didn't say anything right away. She seemed distracted, her eyes scanning the town, as if she were searching for something, or someone. Jack noticed the change in her expression. It was subtle, but it was there. For the first time, she looked uneasy again, her lips pressed tightly together, her hands gripping the reins a little too tightly. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, his concern growing. "You're acting like you're expecting someone." Mary hesitated, and for a moment Jack thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I just don't know if I'm ready to face people yet."
Jack understood.
He knew what it was like to avoid facing the past, to keep running. He had done his own share of running in his life, though it had always been in search of peace rather than escape. But there were things that needed to be faced eventually, no matter how difficult it was. He wasn't going to push her, but he wanted her to know that it was okay to take a break, to let her guard down, if only for a moment. "We don't have to stay long," Jack said gently. "Just long enough to get some food, a warm bed, and a good night's sleep." "You've been on the road a long time. You deserve it." Derry looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to figure out if she could trust him. There was a long pause, and then, finally, she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "I guess a little rest wouldn't hurt." Jack smiled, relieved that she had agreed. They found a small inn near the center of the town, a modest building with a sign that read, "The Pinewood Inn." It looked clean, if a bit old-fashioned, but it had the comfort of familiarity. They entered, and the innkeeper, a kind woman with gray hair, greeted them with a warm smile.
"We've got a room for the night," Jack said, paying for the stay.
The woman gave them the key, and they headed upstairs to their room. The room was small but cozy, with a bed covered in a thick quilt and a window that looked out over the town. It was quiet, peaceful. Jack could see that Mary seemed a little more relaxed now that they were indoors, away from the road. She sat down on the edge of the bed, looking out the window.
"You can take the bed," Jack said, pointing to the quilt.
"I'll sleep on the floor." Mary shook her head. "You've been riding just as long as I have," she said softly. "You take the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." Jack didn't argue. He wasn't used to sleeping in comfortable beds, but he knew Mary needed the rest more than he did. He settled onto the floor, laying down with his coat under his head as a pillow. The soft sound of Mary's breathing soon filled the room, and Jack let his eyes drift shut, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept racing with thoughts of Mary, of the things she had said, and the things she hadn't said. He could tell that she was still hiding something important. But he wasn't going to push her. He had learned that people opened up when they were ready, not when someone forced them. For now, he was content to be here, to offer her the space she needed to heal, even if he didn't know all the details. The night passed quietly, and the next morning they set off again. This time, however, the journey felt different. Jack noticed that Mary seemed more at ease, her shoulders less tense, her steps a little lighter. Maybe the rest had done her good. Or maybe, just maybe, she had found a small piece of peace in the quiet of the town. They continued on their way, the road ahead stretching out before them like an endless ribbon. Mary didn't speak much at first, but as the day went on, she began to open up bit by bit, brothers. She told Jack small stories about her life before everything had changed. She didn't go into details, but it was enough to show him that there was more to her than the quiet woman he had met on the road. So their journey continued, one step at a time. Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he was doing the right thing. Helping Mary wasn't just about offering a ride. It was about offering a chance to start over, a chance to move forward, even if it was in the smallest of ways. They didn't know where the road would lead, but as long as they were walking it together, it felt like they were headed in the right direction. The journey continued, and as days passed, both Jack and Mary found themselves adapting to a rhythm they hadn't expected. They spent their mornings riding through the open country, the afternoons resting under the shade of trees, and the evenings sharing meals and stories. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had become a comfortable presence, something they both accepted as a part of their journey. It wasn't just about reaching a destination anymore. It was about the peace they found in each other's company, the companionship that had grown between them. One afternoon, as they passed through another small town, Mary's demeanor changed. Jack noticed it immediately. The way she looked at the town from a distance, the way her hands tightened on the reins of the horse. But she wasn't speaking as much, and her eyes had a distant, almost haunted look. Jack could see the way her body tensed with every person they passed, the way she avoided looking anyone in the eye. "But are you okay?" Jack asked, his voice full of concern. Mary hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting between the people walking in the town square. I am not ready to face anyone here." "Not yet," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This place. It brings back too many memories, Rust." Jack could sense that this wasn't just a passing feeling. There was something more to it, something she wasn't telling him. He didn't push her, but he knew that this moment was important. It was a moment when she needed his understanding, not his questions. "We don't have to stay long," Jack said. "We can keep going. Find somewhere else." Mary nodded, grateful for the kindness in his voice. She didn't look at him directly, but kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Thank you," she murmured.
"I appreciate that." They kept riding, passing through the town without stopping. The roads began to wind through dense forests and rolling hills, and soon the town was nothing more than a distant memory.
As they traveled further from the town, Jack noticed that Mary seemed to relax a little. The tension in her shoulders eased, and her breathing became more even. She wasn't fully at ease, but she was taking the first steps toward facing the past she had been running from. Jack admired her strength, even though he knew there was still so much she hadn't shared. That evening, as the sun began to set, they stopped by a quiet creek to rest. Jack tied the horse to a nearby tree, and they sat down on the soft grass, the sound of the water flowing gently in the background. The night was falling fast, and the stars began to twinkle above them, filling the sky with a soft, peaceful glow. It was one of those perfect moments when the world seemed to stop and everything felt right. The kind of moment where, for just a little while, you could forget about the worries that weighed on you. Mary sat beside Jack, her knees pulled up to her chest, and her eyes gazed out at the stars. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet was comfortable, a companion that they had both learned to appreciate. Finally, after what felt like hours of peaceful silence, Mary spoke. "Round."
"I'm sorry," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Jack turned to look at her, surprised by the sudden shift in her tone.
"You don't have to apologize," he said gently. "You've been through a lot." Mary shook her head slowly, a hint of frustration crossing her features. "I've been running, Jack. Running from everything. My past, the people I hurt, the things I should have done differently. But I can't keep running forever, can I?" Jack was quiet for a moment, letting her words settle. He didn't know the full story, but he could see that it wasn't just a simple matter of wanting to escape. There were deep emotions in her words, things that she had kept hidden for so long. He had seen it in the way she looked at the world, in the way she avoided speaking about her past. It wasn't just fear. It was guilt, shame, things that people carried with them when they didn't know how to face what they had done. "You don't have to do it alone," Jack said, his voice steady. "We all have things we're running from, but that doesn't mean we can't stop running when we're ready." Mary looked at him then, really looked at him. Her eyes softened, and there was a vulnerability in them that Jack had never seen before. It was as though, in that moment, she was finally allowing herself to acknowledge the pain she had been carrying. She had always been guarded, always trying to keep others at a distance, but now she seemed to be considering something different. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop running. "I don't know how to fix what's happened," she said softly, "but I think I want to try." "I want to stop running, Jack. I want to stop being afraid of facing it all."
Jack nodded, understanding more than she knew. "That's the first step," he said.
"It's not about fixing everything at once. It's about taking that first step forward, even when you're scared." Breaths. "You don't have to do it all today or tomorrow. But you've already started." Mary smiled a little, a faint, genuine smile that made Jack feel like he had helped her in some small way. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Best. I don't know if I can ever truly repay you for everything you've done, but I'll try. I won't forget this. Jack shrugged, trying to keep things light. Breath. There's nothing to repay. I'm just glad I could help. We all need a little help sometimes, right? For a moment there was a quiet understanding between them, a moment of connection that transcended words. Jack had always been a solitary man, used to relying on himself, but now he felt like he was part of something bigger. He was helping Mary, but she was also helping him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Sometimes the road you traveled wasn't just about where you were going. It was about who you traveled with and how they changed you along the way. As the night deepened, they sat in silence, watching the stars, letting the cool night air settle around them. The world seemed peaceful again, the worries of the past few days slowly fading into the background. They weren't out of the woods yet. Mary still had her journey ahead, and Jack still had his own burdens to bear. But for that moment, they were just two people, sitting by a creek, sharing a quiet night, and taking one more step toward healing. Spend it. The next day, as they continued their journey, something felt different. There was a weight that had lifted from both of them, something unspoken but understood. The road was long, but they no longer felt quite as alone as they had before. They were facing forward now, both ready to take whatever came next, together. They didn't know where the road would lead. It could lead to another town, another chance at a new life, or perhaps just another chapter in their journey. But whatever it was, they were ready to face it together. And that, in itself, was enough to give them hope.